Ow, D, O, feel. Boom, 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 boom. Ow, D, O, feel. Ow, D, O, feel. Ow, D, O, feel. Feel, feel.
We are very happy to have Jean-Michel Jarre here for an interview today. You will release your new album, Electronica, and which is part one of two albums, right?
Yes.
And if you could have a trip with a time machine, which is the subtitle of this album, to which era would you like to travel?
To the future.
To the future?
Yeah, because we know the past already, or we heard about it, and I would be very curious to know what the end of the 21st century would be. Do we have a car flying, or where will it be, and how the education system would be? How I hope that the people would be maybe happier and having less trouble than now, and also in terms of day-to-day life. What the life could be. I mean, when you think about the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 20th century, you have at the beginning of the 20th century, you had front pages in German or French newspapers saying that after 60 kilometers per hour, your head would explode if you go in a steam train over 60 kilometers per hour. So you know that it was the provisions and the forecasts are never that human beings are thinking about.
Mm. And what about the music in the future? What do you think? How will it be?
I think, technology always dictated styles. It's because we invented the piano that Chopin existed, because it's because also the 78 as a record has been invented, that Elvis Presley was doing some 3 minutes rock and roll songs, and it became kind of format for a single on the radio, because you could only put these 78 in jukeboxes, and it's because also analog synthesizers have been invented that I'm here in the studio with you, and technology is always dictating styles, and because with technology is evolving so quickly these days, I think that music is going to follow this technological movement. But having said that, I think electronic music becoming the classical music of the 21st century, with this idea that music is not approached anymore only with notes and based on solfeggio, but based on sounds. And these days you can record the sound of the wind, the sound of the rain, and making music with it. Mm. And that's something absolutely different, which will remain and become the classical way of doing music in the 21st century.
But don't you think there will also be analog instruments in the future?
I think, we are made of blood and flesh, so we are analog animals. And obviously, the marriage, cohabitation between the analog world and the digital world will be stronger and stronger, because we love the virtual world, but we need also tangible objects. I mean, it's interesting and funny to see that at the moment you have a real revival of vinyls. It's not because of nostalgia. It's because we always have this kind of go-between the total abstraction of the virtual world, and also being able to touch and having a direct physical contact with technology and with our environment. And there is one song I've done with Laurie Anderson in Electronica 1, and it's about a kind of love song, strange, odd love song between a smartphone and a human being. In days where lots of people are touching their smartphones more than their partner, it's the whole irony and the whole paradox of this kind of strange relationship we have with technology.
But they are touching it. So people want to touch something, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we cannot have only a kind of abstract or virtual relationship with the outside world. I mean, and it's one of the recurrent theme of electronica is this ambiguous position we have, attitude we have with technology. In one sense, we think we are connected to the world through our laptops, and we are not sometimes talking to our neighbor anymore. And this whole project is about our conversation. The fact that I wanted to gather around me some musicians from who are a source of inspiration to me, but who are linked directly or indirectly to the electronic music scene. But also in days where also in music you have this trend of featuring album, and I hate this word. I think it's very sometimes a bit artificial. And this idea is actually to send through the internet a file, and you don't talk to people. I mean, putting a top line, vocal or guitar, or whatever, on your music, and you will never talk to them. You will never meet them, and most of the time it's yes, and most of the time it's a kind of artificial or marketing trick. And in my case, I really wanted to meet with people, to spend time together in the studio, because I think this is also the way that electronic musicians, are like painters in their atelier. It's a quite kind of solitary activity, and sharing your secrets, sharing your maniac things to do things, and also the way to also your weak points, your weaknesses. I mean, you are a bit naked when you are in your own studio, and to share these moments, difficult sometimes, and everybody said yes. All the artists said yes, and these artists are linked to the electronic music scene over four decades. So you have people from the young generation, people closer to mine. They have also in common, all these artists, such as Massive Attack or Moby or Air. They have an instant recognizable touch, but also they also have this kind of organic approach to sounds. What we were talking about this kind of analog or physical contact with the outside world. I mean, we all have this. We all have in common what, in my opinion, electronic music is. Electronic music is like cooking. It's like putting your hands into the textures and cooking frequencies and waveforms.
Are you a good cook?
I'm from Lyon, which is a town in France. I mean, with one of the best reputations in cooking. So it's in my genes. So it's what I'm trying to do in my music as well.
Perfect. I think it is very sexy if men can cook.
Yes, I think so too. Yes, but when women are cooking, it could be sexy as well.
Okay. So you traveled all over the world, to Vienna, to Berlin, to Los Angeles to have this new album. How long did it take, the work for this album?
Actually, I started this project more or less 5 years ago, and I sent the invitations and I had a wish list with lots of different people, because actually these days electronic music has no boundaries anymore. It's everywhere, and you have so many different genres of music, of electronic music. And I got the surprise that everybody said yes. And then I had to travel, as you said, all over the world to meet with people. And the dogma I had was to compose a piece of music, a demo, in function of my fantasy or the idea I had vis-à-vis those musicians, and also obviously to leave enough space for them to collaborate.
So it is sort of tailor-made. Every song
That's right.
fits the artist.
Absolutely, yeah.
And did it always work with the artists, with the face-to-face meeting?
Listen, yes, I had no idea if first of all people would accept the idea, and I've been really moved and touched by the fact that everybody was really open and quite enthusiastic about the idea. And sometimes it took more time because of their own agendas, but some of the time it was quite quick. I mean, what I like in this project is actually every track, every piece of music it has a specific story. It contains something different because of the character of the personality of every artist. And I remember that when I first met Moby, I was starting playing something, and he said, it's amazing because I have this keyboard for years, and you put your hands on it, it's immediately your touch. And he was at the same time doing just a very simple D minor on the keyboard, and I said, it's amazing because it's Moby. And it's what we call style. And you know, he had this kind of depressive touch on the way he puts chords and all that. I used to call him a kind of Woody Allen of techno.
Okay.
This kind of depressive touch he has. And we all have in common this love for melodies. I mean, you take M83 and Moby and Massive Attack, Air, also Tangerine Dream. We all think that the melody is one of the most important things in the music.
Or Vince Clarke.
Or Vince Clarke as well. He created great melodies, and Vince Clarke, one of the founder of one of the founders of Depeche Mode. He is definitely for me the sound of the 80s, but it's also timeless. Sorry?
The old school.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, it's an absolute reference these days for creators. I mean, it's the sound and the look of the 80s is everywhere, in movies, in literature, lifestyle, clothing, and everything. And you know, it's very interesting because you take the sound of Vince Clarke. It's related to the 80s, but it's absolutely timeless. You take the sound of Massive Attack. For me, it's one of the sound of the 90s, but it's also timeless. I mean, the sound of Vince Clarke, the Massive Attack, M83, Air. I mean, in 30 years' time from now, I'm absolutely convinced that they will be relevant.
So is this a sort of retrospective also to your life or your career, this new project?
I wouldn't say that because it was more kind of a journey through electronic music. When I started electronic music, I was convinced that it would become one of the major genres of doing music. Electronic music has nothing to do with jazz or blues or rock. It has nothing to do with America. It's coming from continental Europe.
Especially from France.
From Germany and France, with people like Stockhausen and Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry, and then with people from Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and myself, and then people from like Air or Daft Punk and the Berlin scene, electronic scene, which is very important. And I think the heritage is coming from classical music, this long instrumental piece, and this what makes electronic music quite unique, because the instruments sometimes are developed in America or in Japan, but the Europeans are using these instruments to make and to create that genre. From even now, if it's worldwide, and you have obviously great electronic musicians in America, in the UK, and everywhere else, it has its roots from here in continental Europe.
So did you never miss vocals in the last 40 years of your music, because you normally don't have any singer or any vocalist on your albums?
You know, it's a very interesting question, because since 40, 50 years, we have the tendency to think that the only music which is existing would be songs. But you know, songs
at
are a
least in pop music, at least.
Yeah, but even historically, songs are just a sector of music, and even in pop music, you have jazz, you have the electro, you have soundtracks, you have classical music, you have contemporary classical music, and you have electronic music, and which probably makes a difference with pop. The pop music is actually lots of electronic music is instrumental. And I like this, even if I've done lots of songs, and as a paradox, I wrote a lot of lyrics for French rock singers, pop singers, and I've always been interested by the phonetics and the sound of the words. So it's not a contradiction, but there is also some music without lyrics. And why I'm saying this is because I always thought that which is interesting with music is the fact that you can write the soundtrack of the story or the movie you have in your mind. I mean, electronic music is not telling you a story. There is no narrative content. But the beauty of it is actually it allows you to create your own story, to create your own movie in your mind, and which I like with electronic music as well as jazz or classical music. Maybe it's my French roots, but I have a more impressionist approach to things in general, and for me it's not much more a matter of textures, of colors, or moods. What I'm trying to express. I like this relationship with the audience to create emotions. I mean, you know, I see my work as a musician is about making the air vibrating. And you know, it's quite invisible. And depending on how I make the air vibrating, I can produce or generate tears, or the fact that we want to move our body and dancing until the end of the night, or having sex, or being bored, or whatever. And this is very subtle work. It's just depending on how you make the air vibrating. It's quite invisible, but it's also all linked on emotions and perception and the way you are going to receive these sounds. It's the opposite of lots of preconceived ideas where we think sometimes that electronic music would be cold or robotic. It's the reverse. For me, it's a music so tactile and organic and sensual.
But what is it? Is it the harmonies or the rhythm or the mood or the melody which makes the difference whether it is sexy or it is moving to tears, your music?
It's the mixing of all what you said. It's a combination of this. It's like like when you cook. It depends on all the ingredients. All the ingredients together creates a good meal or a mediocre one. And it's the same thing. It's this kind of very fine combination between the melodic part, the rhythm part, and the textures as well. And this is depending on what you want to, not only to express for other people, but the mood you're in as a composer, as a musician. And for the first time in history of music, you are becoming your own craftsman. You can, like a painter, you can decide of the kind of range of sounds and textures you are going to deal with for the next piece of music you are going to compose.
There are a lot of artists or bands who wouldn't have existed without electronic instruments because the musicians couldn't play any analog instrument. For example, Alphaville. They told us they wanted to make music, so they were so happy to have synthesizers.
Technology dictates style. And it's true, but maybe if these instruments were not existing and if these guys wanted to create some music, they maybe would have found another way. I'm coming from a classical background, and I used to play also in rock bands when I was a teenager. And all this also allowed me to get to have my proper approach to music. But which is interesting in these days is actually, even if the traditional way of learning music with solfeggio and all this is part of training, you don't need necessarily this training. You could also choose another kind of training, because by dealing on through your software and all through the computer these days, you can also approach music in a totally different way, through sounds, through experimenting frequencies, and this is another way to do some music. It's not better or worse, it's just different.
Another technique.
Absolutely.
By these encounters with the different artists, did you also learn something about you and your music?
Yes, it's I think that music composition is a constant learning process, and obviously this journey all over the world to share music and the creative process with so many great artists has been an initiation journey for me and also a learning process. I think it has been, I hope, a learning process both ways. But you know, when we are together in a studio like we are today, it's totally different than if we had this kind of conversation through Skype, for instance.
Sure.
It's the physical contact, and especially at the moment of a creative process, it's something that we don't experiment that often. Because as a musician, you have your family, your relatives, you have your audience. Maybe you can join forces with musicians on stage, but it's very rare to share creative process at the beginning with other musicians. And especially with in the electronic music scene, where it's a kind of solitary activity. You have very few bands of electronic music, and when you have bands, there are two. So it's not like
that's
rock and
right,
roll or jazz, you know.
Yeah, there are a lot of famous duos like Yellow,
Air, Daft Punk, Chemical Brothers. I mean,
Erasure.
yes, you have so many.
So many.
But not bands with 5 or 6
Yes.
people. So it's more like the work of a writer or painter doing this kind of music.
And did you learn about you that you are a good or a bad team player, for example?
You know, we all have our style, and I mean, when you, after a while, it's not a matter of being good or not good. It's more a matter of being relevant on what you want to achieve, and you have you have so many different ways of working. What I've learned, for instance, we were talking about Moby just before, and Moby has a total different way. We have a total different way of working. For example, would take one pattern and he will make the arrangement of this section, and then when it's finished, he will move to the next one, where I take one track from A to Z, I record this, and then a little bit like a tart or cake, I work on the second layer, and then the third one, and then the fourth one, even if I'm actually after I move the structure, but I do the overall structure first.
Okay.
These are examples of there is nothing better or worse. It's just a different approach. For this reason, it has been a very positive learning process for, I think, for all of us.
Has it sometimes been hard because the artists were able to have their own approach to the titles you wrote and to do with them what they wanted to do?
You know, it's very interesting because I thought that when I came with demos I had in mind for them, I was expecting that they would change much more, changing the structure, doing something else, and then they've been quite respectful about the structure I had in mind, and they added a lot of things, and because the idea was actually by the end of the day, for every piece of music and every collaboration, to get this kind of balance, 50-50 type of balance of who is doing what. What I think exists in this album, that was one of my challenge, to say, I mean, gathering around me, I mean, people so different as Massive Attack and Air, M83, John Carpenter, Laurie Anderson, Vince Clarke, Tangerine Dream, or Fog Buttons. And I think it works because, first of all, because it's my album, so actually I'm the link between all these artists, and also because they probably composed and did some music in function of me also. And they let me having what we call the final cut. So at the end of all the sessions we had together, they said, "It's your album, man. We trust you about finalizing the mixing and all this." So I think that which creates kind of unity of this album, and also for the next one, because as you said at the beginning of our conversation, Electronica, because everybody said yes, I had to divide a little bit like a movie in two parts, like Kill Bill 1, Kill Bill 2. I mean, having this kind of project divided into two parts. And it's the same for the next album with 15 other collaborators. It's also something that works also because we worked and with the respect that it's my album, and I have the responsibility to create the link with all the members of this big family.
So it is still a Jean-Michel Jarre album, and not a Moby or a Yellow album, but it's Jean-Michel Jarre.
That's right, exactly.
We are friends of Boris
Blanc,
Yeah.
yes.
And he told us, I think in January, oh, we will have this project with Jean-Michel Jarre, and then he sent us an email, no, we can't broadcast this. It is secret, still secret.
No, because you know, it's true actually. Boris didn't realize that he revealed lots of names far before, and suddenly all fans all around the world were blah, 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 blah. And I called Boris, I said, no, please don't, it's too soon, too early to you
But
know.
he's such a kind guy.
Yes.
We love him, really.
Yes, I mean, both of them, and Dieter also,
Yes.
I mean, both of them are so great. And I mean,
Has
I'm really...
this been the hardest or the easiest one with
Oh,
Yellow?
one among the easiest ones.
Okay.
I mean, but to tell you the truth, it's difficult to say that, but but it has been quite cool for with every artist. I mean, it's like if every artist is feeling the same way as being a bit remote or isolated, and suddenly it's a. I was going to say that it's a bit of oxygen, but it's probably true.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ow.
So then part 2 will be released in
In April 2016.
April. Okay.
Yes.
Which will be with
Feel.